Morning.
Good morning, Gavin. I don't know why
I've missed y'all. How y'all been?
Oh, we've been doing good.
All right. Got it. Okay, cool. All right. You look good. You look rested.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I do not feel it. It is, man, I'll tell you, having a, let me turn my video on. I don't know why my video's not. There we go. I don't know, having a baby on a pandemic, whoa, a lot different than normal times, man. I'm just having help. Golly. Just somebody to come over and hold the baby for like an hour while you shower and eat and, you know.
Oh, you've done the baby thing before.
Yeah. Was the trip good?
Yes, it was.
You got to relax. Awesome.
All right.
Hang on. These were the ones that you forwarded, right? The GAR contracts?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
But there's not too much that's changed since you last went through it.
Okay, man, I'm sorry I missed the last one. I was getting ready to come on, and then Isabella threw up all over me, and she was having a little tantrum. So by the time I was hoping y'all still might be going by the time I got on, but all right, get rid of this and get rid of this.
Okay, Shaq. There's Shaq.
Speaker. There we go. All right. That's one document. There are two. Stay docs 4. Here it is. There's the second packet. All right.
Oh.
Hey y'all, what's up? How's it going?
Good morning, Shaq. Good.
Morning.
It's going good so far.
Awesome.
All right. So 10:04. Everybody should have been here on time. Don't have time to wait. This is a lot to get through in 40 minutes. So if you open up your PDFs that I sent out last night, you can follow along. If you printed them out, good for you. That was a lot of paper.
Free.
But with just YouTube, this will be easy. This is a refresher for Gavin. This is something that Shaq's been waiting on for quite a few months that I finally got to doing.
How are you, man?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Good. Been a while.
Been a long time. Yes, it has.
I don't think I talked to you since you joined the team.
Nope. It's all here now. It should be the GAR should be a refresher for me too. I think it's everything else. Really.
With all the paperwork that goes with it.
Yeah, after the GAR, because GAR is the only thing that I've ever worked with. But yeah, but like everything.
Okay, so then. Who's that? Barbara. Oh, goody, Barbara's here. Good morning, Barbara.
David.
Hello.
I'll show my face in a second. How are y'all?
We're doing good.
Good.
And I can barely hear you. You need to turn your volume on your mic up.
Let me get my headphones.
Oh, well, so 10:06. All right, let's get started because I want to make sure we get through this for everyone who was on time. Purchase and sale is going to be the main thing. The second packet has everything that goes with the purchase and sale. So if we start at the top of the purchase and sale form, the offer date. Offer date's very, very important because as we get into the exhibits for the contract, that date needs to go on your exhibits. So always make sure your offer date is correct and you push it over into the other exhibits. Section A, item 1, property identification. Every single line that you see there needs to be filled in. The address, the city, the county, and the zip. MLS number should be filled in, and if there is no FMLS number, which is rare, but it does happen, then you put NA. Tax parcel ID needs to be filled in.
Hold on. Sorry, David. I just got back from getting my headphones.
Oh, okay.
Where are we? Sorry. We're back. We're on which contract right now?
The purchase and sale agreement.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, make sure your date's filled in. And
Okay.
item A1A, make sure you put the complete address. FMLS number needs to have something there. If there is no FMLS number, NA, and make sure you have your tax ID number there.
Okay.
1B, the legal description. Attached as an exhibit. If you select that, you need to have it as an attachment. And unfortunately, I put 2 pages in front of something that I shouldn't have. If you look at packet 2, page 3, there's the legal description exhibit. This is one way to do this. However, you need to make sure that you have all of the information filled out. Sometimes someone will put a land lot in, but they won't put the district, they won't put the block. That makes it an incomplete legal exhibit. It makes it non-enforceable. Because in order for a contract to be valid, you have to have a correct legal description. People can screw this thing up. That is why I suggest that you always select B3, the same as described in the deed book and page. And that is so easy to find. You go to the county website, the tax assessor, not tax commissioner, but the tax assessor's website, put the address in and look down, usually towards the bottom or under a tab called sales, and you're going to see the last sale, and there will be a deed book and page number there. Use it. It always protects you, and you do not have to worry about missing information. Sometimes agents will put a legal description in their documents. That legal description should look very, very formal, and it should have a county stamp at the top. That is also acceptable, and it goes under number 1. Number 4, as you see, it's the same thing that's on the legal description exhibit. Same thing applies. It has to be complete or it's not valid. For B2, if you scroll in the second package to page 4, these are required with condominium sales. These are very, very tricky because there's a deed book and page, there's a condominium plat book and page, there is a condominium floor book.
I'm gonna zoom to
book and page.
Right.
And you have to get those numbers correct. And it can be very, very difficult to figure it out when you look at those legal descriptions for a condominium. Because sometimes, especially if the floor plan or the plat book has changed multiple times, you've got to go and figure out which one was the last one or which one was the original one. So on those, be very careful. That is something I'll help you on a one-on-one situation. Purchase price, how much you're going to pay for it. Seller's contribution, how much is the seller being asked to contribute to the buyer's closing cost? If they are not, put a 0 in that box. And when you're looking at this form, and if you're filling the forms out through what will now be Docs Plus, used to be RDocs, if you see a $sign on the contract, the system is only going to let you put in numbers. You can no longer type in words. So always be sure to put a 0. That way there's no question. Closing date. When will the property close? What date? And then under that, very, very important, will possession be given at closing, or is the sale or so many days after the closing? If it's after the closing, you are required to use form F219, which is on page 5. Oh, shoot, it is not. Darn it. You know what? I know where it is, and we'll go through it. We'll go through it in the end when I go through exhibits. Holder of earnest money. That is, if a closing attorney is put in that box, you have to have the F510 and the F511. And what that does, it holds the closing attorney to the same standards that they hold brokers to when brokers hold earnest money. And if you scroll down to page 4 of the packet 2, I'm sorry, page 5, that is the F510. That is what the buyer and seller initial, stating that they give the right to the closing attorney to act as holder of the earnest money. Again, you need an exhibit letter. Exhibits are lettered, amendments are numbered. And as you'll see, the first line, the exhibit is part of an agreement with an offer date of. That is the date on the top of your purchase and sale. Everything else tells what they're going to do with the money. But number 8, alternate holder. There has to be someone as the alternate if the closing attorney does not agree to hold the earnest money. So be prepared. We hold earnest money. Most companies hold earnest money. Village Realty does not. Come to Atlanta does not. But most of them will hold earnest money. And number 10, the closing attorney contact information needs to be filled in. And I will say this, as the seller, if you're representing the seller and you get this form from the buyers and the buyer's agent has not filled that information in, let me admit, it is your responsibility to make sure that the information is filled in. So even though an agent may leave out information, it is still your responsibility to make sure that the information is filled in and the document is executed. So for the closing attorney, you need their name, you need their address, you need a phone number, and you need an email for them. So make sure, that's one of the things I'm finding that agents aren't doing. They're not checking contracts that are sent to them for missing information because they have a mindset that, okay, well, it's the other side. They wrote it. It's their responsibility. Actually, no, you're both responsible to have a fully executed and binding contract that is properly completed. The next form for that, which is packet 2, page 6, this is for the closing attorney. You normally will not get this one signed initially. It's usually sent back from the closing attorney with a copy of the wiring confirmation that they've received earnest money. But it is still necessary to make sure that all the blanks are filled in, the law firm at the top is there, the buyer and the seller is there, the offer date's there, and the property address. The contact information in number 4, yes, it needs to be completed. And I'm going to tell you something about contact information. There are 2 parties to a contract, that is the buyer and the seller, period, end of story. Agents sign contracts, addendums as acknowledgement only. You're only acknowledging the contract. So in the contract, there is a part where it talks about notices and how notices are to be sent. A buyer and a seller have full right to communicate between each other outside their agents. Is it a good practice? It's not best practice, but yes, they do have that right. So if a buyer wants to serve notice on a seller, they do not have to go through you as the agent. They can do it direct because they're the party and the seller's the party. And that is why you need to have at least one of the 3 forms of contact for clients in your paperwork, which is either you need to have an address, you need to have a phone number, or you need to have an email. And if it so much says nobody uses me, or a fax number. But something's got to be there that the 2 parties of the contract, buyer and seller, can contact each other and serve notice. Second page of the 511, that is where the buyer and the seller's, buyer's agent, seller's agent's information goes, and it needs to be complete. The address of the brokerage needs to be there, your phone number, and your email address. And at the bottom of that form, all of the closing attorney information needs to be there as well. So if we flip back to the purchase and sale agreement, that'll take us into the actual, number 6, closing attorney. That is where the name of the closing attorney is going to go. It is best practice and my suggestion, especially if you use a contract to close service, put which attorney's location you're going to use. If you're using someone like Campbell and Brannon that's got 10 closing locations, please put the location that you want. If you have a specific attorney you want to use there, put that information in there as well. Campbell and Brannon, Buckhead, Whitwood as the closing attorney. The more information you provide, the less trouble you're going to have, the other side will have, and the closing attorney itself will have. They'll know exactly what to do with it when they get it. Number 7, earnest money. I am hoping that this verbiage will change. And for those of you who do not know, you get 2 GAR form changes a year. They change January 1st, and then they change again in May. They may change throughout the rest of the year, but only if it's something extremely important to the contract where they determine that legally something's not going to stand up. But 2 GAR form changes happen a year without fail, January and May. With the earnest money, especially if you're using the closing attorney to hold it, when the form was initially put out, it required that the buyer had to send earnest money via wiring instructions. That was the only option if you were using the closing attorney to hold earnest money. That changed this year, and it changed after May. It changed in basically with COVID, and the change sort of happened in, I think, late June, early July. You can now, the buyer can now send money to the closing attorney via check or via wire. However, it is the attorney's, it's at the attorney's discretion. They have to decide how they're going to accept earnest money. If they accept check, that's fine. If they accept wire, that's fine. If they accept both, that is fine. So I'm hoping to see with the January change that it will be a check / and/or wire option there. For 7A, if you mark 7A, that means you have the deposit check in hand with the offer. It does not mean that they're going to give it to you the next day. It is you have it when you're writing the offer, the buyer is writing their earnest money check. For number 7B, within 3 days of binding, that means that the buyer is going to have X amount of days to get the earnest money to the earnest money holder. When you write your contracts, please remember what day of the week you're writing. If you're writing a contract on Thursday, it gets accepted on Friday, and you put 2 days, that means your buyer somehow needs to get that earnest money to the holder within those 2 days. It does not mean that they need to get it to you, because agents cannot hold earnest money. You have as the rule is, you need to turn that over to the holder in the most reasonable time possible. So make sure you count your days when you're doing that. If you're doing a contract on Thursday, you think it's going to be accepted on a Friday, make sure it's at least 3 days, so you've got business day Monday. Look at your calendar and make sure there's not a holiday and your broker's not going to be closed. And I'm going to tell you this, this is one of the biggest things that the commission has issues with. And when they audit files, they will look at that binding date. They're going to look at the date the earnest money holder deposited it. And if those 2 dates do not match, there's going to be a problem. So if you say earnest money is going to be delivered on a Monday, but you don't get it till a Tuesday, you're going to have to do an amendment that states the actual date that earnest money was received by the earnest money holder. 7C is for anything else or any other agreement that the buyer and the seller come up with. So earnest money can be anything. It can be cash, it can be jewels, it can be a car, it can be a promissory note, it can be anything that the buyer and the seller agree to. You need to find out if your earnest money holder is going to deal with that type of situation. It is not a good idea to hold cash. The general rule of earnest money is earnest money, if it's returned, needs to be returned in the same form it was given. So if you give $1,000 in cash, every single one of those bills, the full serial number has to be recorded. The earnest money has to be held in a safe, locked location by the holder. And if for any reason the buyer gets that money back, legally, they're supposed to get back the exact same thing that they gave you. So those serial numbers of the bills should match when you give it back to them. That's why no one does cash. But it is legal, and it's okay if the buyer and the seller agree to it. There is also, this is also used for special circumstances where it might say, you can select C and say $3,000 earnest money will be delivered 2 days after end of due diligence. So you could almost write a special stip in that section if you want to. Number 8, inspection and due diligence. This is how many days the buyer can get out of the contract for any reason whatsoever, and they do not have to give the reason they're getting out of it. There is, however, if you look at packet 2, page 8, property sold with right to request repairs exhibit. This is really good to use. It can be good to use if you're in a multiple offer situation. Because what this form says is, the only way I'm going to get out of here, out of the contract, is if we cannot come to agreement on repairs. So when you use this form, there are no due diligence days. You would put 0 in section 8A, and you would attach this as an exhibit to the contract. But you have to be very, very careful. The buyer has to understand that just because they wake up the next morning and say, oh crap, we found this other house, I want to pull out of this contract, you just can't do that with this form. You have to not be able to come to understanding with the repair request. So if you write this and you send over the repair request and the seller agrees to do it, you are still in contract, and if you cancel it, you're in breach and you're not going to get your earnest money back. So it's a good form to use if you're in multiple offer situation and the buyer is absolutely 100% sure this is my dream home and this is the home that I want. Section 8B1 and 2. This is rarely used, and it is basically for people who want a very long period of inspection. There are certain homes in Atlanta, and Nakia is not on here, but she did sell one. It was an $8 million property. When you're getting into the 10,000 plus square foot range in homes, it takes a lot more than the 4 hours for a typical inspection. Nakia had one for the same client under contract. It was 24,000 square feet. It took 2 inspectors 2.5 days to complete the inspection and another 3 to prepare the report. So when you're asking for a long due diligence period, which can kick in, usually the standard is 5, 7, 10, or 12, based upon when you're going under contract, what's the schedule like for your preferred inspector, and are you in the holiday season? So when you ask for a lot of days, the seller can say, okay, I'll give you those days, but you're going to pay for those extra days beyond the norm. And that will tell you how much it will be, how it's going to be delivered, is it going to be applied towards the purchase price, and is it going to be refundable? But as I said, rarely would you use it. So if you do not use it, even if you're not using it, there's a $sign there. Do not leave a blank. Put a 0 in there. There's no question about it. Item 9, lead-based paint, and that example is in packet 2, page 9. This form cannot be waived. You will see a lot of people who will say no disclosures. If the property was built prior to 78, you have to have the form. You cannot waive the form. So don't let anyone tell you that they can waive it. You can't. So it's a required form, and there's certain things that you have to do. This form got changed at the 1st of this year. So item 3, A, B, and C will all have initials. So the buyers have to initial A and B, and then they have to initial either they receive the 10-day opportunity or they waive the opportunity to conduct the risk assessment. So A, B signed, one of the 2 C's will have to be initialed. Number 4 on that exhibit, the broker's acknowledgement. People misunderstand this one all the time, as the agents do. That is only for the selling agent to initial. If a buyer's agent initials there, what you're saying is, as the buyer's agent, you personally went to the seller and discussed all this with the seller. You're putting yourself at risk. Only the seller's agent's initial goes in number 4. If you're representing the seller, go up to number 2. Most people, by default, will always select seller has no knowledge. I have never seen one where the seller says, I have knowledge of anything. So A and B have to be answered, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be seller has no knowledge. Going back to purchase and sale, number 10, brokerage relationships. GGR and Come to Atlanta do not do dual agency, which means that you represent the buyer and the seller equally. you either have to represent one as a client or a customer. And if you have the seller, you already have a client, so the buyer would be a customer. But this section deals with the selling broker is, and that is the name of the brokerage. So it would be selling brokerage is Gallion Group Realty, and you're representing the buyer as a client. The listing broker come to Atlanta, representing the seller as a client. If you are representing a client who is buying a property listed with another agent of the same brokerage, you will become a designated agent. So you would select number 4 under both of them, and then you would write the agent's name. So selling brokerage, Gallion Group Realty, representing the buyer as a client, and is number 4, acting as a designated agent where Gavin has been assigned exclusively to represent the buyer. Listing brokerage is Gallion Group Realty. Number 4, acting as a designated agent where Shaq has been assigned to exclusively represent the seller. If you are selecting number 2 in any list on any side, there is another form that the buyer or the seller has to sign agreeing to be treated as a customer. So you just can't sign them up as a client, as a customer, and not have them sign the form saying they agree to be a customer, because your fiduciary duty somewhat changes. You still have to be fair, etc., but the full confidentiality sometimes can be broken. So you have to be very careful. Number 3, you will never ever select, because we do not offer dual agency. And that means you are trying to represent 2 parties at the same level, which is impossible to do and protect each party's interest. Number 10C, material relationship disclosures has to be filled out. There has to be something there, whether it is NA or none, or Jessica's not on today. Jessica does a lot of business for her family, and she has to state selling or listing agent is related to buyer or seller. If this form comes to you blank, it is your responsibility to put something there. At minimum, for my company, you would have to put GGR equals none. So, as you know, I'm more concerned with my company stating what is true. So I'd always put it in, and guess what? When you put that in there, if it's come to you signed by a buyer and you put something in there, your seller's got to initial it, and it's got to go back to the buyer to initial it at the same time. You cannot add anything to a contract without it being initialed.
Okay.
Tom,
Question.
yep.
Sorry. So on that one, what relationship, like is there like a level where you stop friends? I am working with a buyer that is like, she's friends with my ex-husband, you know, or father of my child.
There usually there has to be some type of blood
Okay.
blood or marriage relationship.
Okay.
If the person is your ex, the relationship tie there is now broken.
Okay, perfect.
So, and the main ones are mother, father, grandparents, brother, sister.
Okay.
Cousin gets really, it sort of gets out there because it's a blood tie, but it's not a direct blood tie.
Okay.
So, you know, if in doubt, put it in there. It can't hurt. Let's put it that way.
Right. Okay.
Time limit of offer. I have sort of went to the side of leaving that blank.
Yeah.
Recently, there's a lot of things that affect that time limit. Number one, I've sent out contracts and the buyer has waited, 6 hours until they got off of work to sign it. Well, you've eaten up a lot of time trying to get a response from a seller. Sometimes sellers are out of the country. You don't know how, even the seller's agent don't know how long it's going to take for them to get in touch with them. But sometimes, especially in multiple, if something's gone on the market really quick or something, and you want a quick answer, put it in there. Just be mindful of telling the client, hey, we're going to give these people a short time to respond. You need to sign this as soon as it comes in order to give them time to fully analyze the offer and get us a response back. So sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but check with the agent, and if you call the selling agent, they're going to tell you, how much time does your client need? And they're going to give you they'll give you an honest answer. And at the bottom of the page, please always make sure that you have your buyers and or your sellers initial the bottom of the page. So we're going to go, I want to go to page, I want something easy to do. Let's go to page 5 of the purchase and sale. Number 2, default. And Shaq, I want you to tell me what 2A means. I'm your buyer. I'm signing the contract. And I ask you, what does that mean?
What page are we on?
We're on page 5 of the purchase and sale, number 2A, remedies of seller.
So if the deal fails to close because of external situation, seller will keep the earnest money.
Okay. So, Barbara, you're going to be on next. I am not going to discuss whether or not Shaq is correct. What I'm going to ask Barbara, and Barbara does have a legal background. Shaq just gave us an interpretation. What did he just do?
Oh, he gave us legal advice. He became an attorney overnight.
Yes. You just practiced law without a license.
Yeah.
As an agent, you are supposed to know this contract backwards and forward. You are not allowed to give an interpretation of what those clauses mean unless you are an attorney. So, when a client asks you to explain something, you have to give a general explanation with a very important follow-up, and that would be 2A. This section deals with what happens if the buyer defaults. For a legal explanation, you need to contact your attorney.
Okay.
And that's another part in this contract. You are not, as agents, we are not allowed to alter or cross out any pre-printed words. So if your buyer doesn't like 2A, you cannot just strike through it and have people initial. It's not allowed. These contracts are written by the attorneys for the Georgia Association of Realtors. If there is a problem and any part of the contract is brought to court, they will defend it for you. They will defend their own work. You alter their work, they're not going to help you. So if there is a section that is not agreed to by both parties, You can't cross it out. You have to go into special steps and say, buyer and seller agrees that section 2A is hereby removed from the contract. You can't make marks on the contract itself. So let's scroll down to page 7 of the purchase and sale. 8, exhibits and addendums. Remember, exhibits have letters, addendums have numbers. And this is where you're going to select what goes on with this. If we turn over to the packet 2, I'm going to run through the financing options really quick. The cash exhibit. The first part of this, number 1, is a very important selection. The top box reserves the right to pay all or a portion by obtaining institutional first mortgage. This is done mostly for hard money lenders. I'm sorry, the first one is they have the right to get it from an institutional. That's a standard lender number. The second one, non-institutional, is hard money, or they don't have the right to obtain any financing. Those 2 boxes are those 3 boxes pay very close attention to. It can change the end of the deal when you get ready to close. Because number B takes away their right to unilaterally extend the contract by sending the 8-day notification. Number 2, verification of funds within X amount of days. They have to show you that they have the ability to close. Where is the money at? In addition, on a side note about this, within so many days, regardless of which side of the transaction you're on, it is your responsibility to keep up with these deadlines. And a lot of that deals with making sure everybody is where they're supposed to be and nobody has breached the contract. Number 5, the appraisal contingency. That's going to say whether it is or is not subject to an appraisal. If so, the rest of this page, the rest of these sections B and C get filled out of who's going to pay for it and how many days do you have to get that appraisal to the seller if it doesn't appraise and you want to ask for a reduction in purchase price. Page 12, the conventional loan exhibit. On this form and almost on every single form, the initials TBD, to be determined, is unacceptable. You'd never want to put something in there that is not clear. So I see a lot of people in the interest rate, they put TBD. Please don't do that. Get the interest rate. And depending upon which side of the transaction, it is a protection. We had an agent at KW who had his client sign this form back when interest rates were around 4.5%, 5%. They put 3.25. That interest rate hadn't been around for months, but that's what they did. Their loan came back, their interest rate was 4.8 something. They pulled out. And they got to keep their earnest money. The seller sued the agent because the agent should have known better. So when you see this and you're presenting it, if you're representing the seller and you present this, you better have a good idea about pretty much where interest rates are, because it is a way out for the buyer. So do not put TBD. If you get it, send it back and tell them they need to put what it is. Number 2 of that form, the approved mortgage lenders. There is a catch to this. If you put a lender's name there, and buyers change lenders all the time after contracts are signed, but if you put a lender's name there, that is who the denial letter must come from. if they end up not being able to get a loan. If you leave it blank, that means they can go to anybody and get a denial letter from anybody, and they will still get their earnest money back. A smart seller's agent, once a lender is selected, a smart agent is going to send out an amendment adding that lender to the loan exhibit. So they're locking them in and saying, okay, well, if we get, 2 weeks down the road and you can't get your financing, the denial better come from this lender or you're not getting your earnest money back. Number 5, financing contingency, and also number 11, appraisal contingency. There's been great debate in the industry of what those blanks need to say. Do they need to be the same? Does one need to be shorter than the other? The general rule of thumb is your appraisal contingency should be a little bit shorter than your financing contingency. When I write contracts, I put 21 days in both. But the premise behind having your appraisal a little bit shorter is, one, you're ensuring that the lender is going to be on their toes and get the appraisal ordered. But it's also going to give you a few days if you cannot come to terms on the appraisal amount. So let's say your appraisal came in, it was $10,000 less, you send over a reduction, they agree to meet in the middle at 5. Well, some buyers may not say that. They say, no, I want the full reduction. So you're giving time to work out the appraisal issue before you have to turn to financing. Because if financing happens before the appraisal, if the financing gets approved, they're approving it at the contract price. If the appraisal comes in lower and they agree to meet in the middle, there's nothing stopping the deal. Moving down to page 15, which is the FHA loan exhibit. The first section, it is the same. It does the same thing, and it will be that way on the VA loan exhibit as well. This is where the meat of the deal goes in. This is the terms, and if the terms aren't met, they have the right to rescind the offer, but you need to make sure that those terms are correct, because their denial needs to be based upon that initial information of how much they're going to put down, how many years it's going to be, and what is the interest rate supposed to be. FHA does have a financing contingency deadline, which is item number 5, but when you go to page 2, your appraisal clause is gone. FHA and VA loans do not have an appraisal limit. The lender can take up to the day of closing to get the appraisal. What the FHA has is the amendatory clause, which is number 11, and that is stating that the property must appraise of no less than, and that's usually put in, purchase price. Do not put the words purchase price in there. You need to put the dollar figure. That's why there's a dollar sign. Don't put the words purchase price. Put how much the contract is for. Because if you put purchase price and somewhere in your amendments and negotiating you've lowered the purchase price, and then something comes back with your, it'll be a mess up. Trust me. Put the dollar amount. Number 12, mortgage premium insurance. FHA charges 1.75. That is not a to be determined amount. It is set in stone. That is what always should be there, 1.75. Then, is it to be paid in full at closing or added to the loan amount? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be number B, added to the loan amount. 14, the costs are included or in addition to any closing costs that the seller may have agreed to pay. Some people put are included, some people put are not included. If I'm on the seller side, I always want to make sure that it says they are included, because I don't want my seller paying any additional amount of money than he has to. Number 15, repairs required. FHA can require a seller to make repairs, and that usually deals with health and safety issues. This is where, as a buyer, you want to make a level playing field, but if you're representing the seller, I get really tight with this. I usually do not let the number exceed 500. So what that means is if they say a deck is bad and it's falling apart and needs to be corrected and it's going to cost $800, the seller's liability is only limited to 500. They are not required to pay the additional amount, and that goes back into a negotiating standpoint. So what will happen is the buyer's agent will go, okay, well, their liability is limited to 500. Do you want to pay the extra 3 to get the job done? If you don't, we can terminate and you get your earnest money back. Number 18, public sewer. FHA can require a house on septic to connect to a sewer if the sewer is available, and it's up to who's going to pay. And once again, it can be not to exceed. Either person can do it. Arm's length transaction. You have to certify if this is an arm's length, that there's no relationship between the buyer and the seller. This has nothing to do with buyer agent, seller agent relationship. This is the buyer and the seller related. They really don't like to see that, and if there is a relationship, be prepared to provide an explanation. VA loan, page 18, is exactly the same as FHA, except there is no number on the amendatory clause on number 11. It is what it is. It comes in at what it comes in. Number 12, the VA funding fee. This is something that the lender should provide to the buyer's agent when they're writing this contract. And how is it going to happen? Is the VA person going to have to pay it in full? Will it be added? Or because of their status, no funding fees required? But you need to have it answered. Once again, 13 gives a limit on cost of repair that the VA may require. And 16, again, public water and sewer, are they going to require it to be connected? Also, with a VA loan is be prepared, if you're on the seller side, to order the termite letter. And it is going to be required, and the seller has to pay for it, and you have to provide the letter, and you have to provide the paid signed invoice stating that the seller paid for it. The signature blocks on these forms are all the same, and I will tell you one thing about these. If you do a counter offer, and in that counter, you change financing terms, these forms are not signed. The seller will not sign the form. Because if you counter and the counter sign and you sign this form, you're going to have conflicting instructions. And it can cause some problems. So if you counter something, they say, well, we need to have this signed. No, you don't, because the information was countered, and I cannot have my seller sign this because it's no longer relating to the terms that were agreed to. Going to page 2, the backup agreement. We're getting into more exhibits. Remember, exhibits are letters. Again, it's the same thing. The offer date has to match the one on the purchase and sale. And what the backup contingency does is your client loves a property, it's under contract, but you want to be a backup offer in case something falls out. This is the form you use. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you send this form, as I always say, don't leave blanks. But number 1, you have to leave blank because you do not know the information. This is on the current binding contract. The listing agent, the seller's agent, will fill this in when you send the form and they send it back. Number 6 sets the date the agreement automatically terminates. So if the selling agent says, okay, it's going to close on the 14th of October, you might put in there, okay, if it's not become primary by the 10th of October, we're going to terminate and we're going to move on to something else. Page 22, the community association disclosure. The community association disclosure is not a required form, but it sort of is, because the closing attorney has to have it in order to order the payoff and get the information of who pays what in fees. So they can say it's a waived form, but somewhere along the line, the seller is going to have to provide this information. And the most important thing about this form is, number 1, you do not fill it out, ever. I don't care if they give you the information, you do not touch this form for any reason. It is a liability form. If you screw up, someone's going to be holding your feet to the fire for the money. They need, if you're on the listing side, the seller needs to pick up the phone and call their HOA and ask them these questions. Because the way the form is written, if there is an initiation fee of $500 and it was only $250 when the seller bought the house and they put $250, the buyer is only on the hook for $250 because that was all that was disclosed. The seller is going to have to chalk up the other $250 because they made the mistake. So if a mistake is made on the form by the seller, they pay the difference. And as I said, yes.
I'm sorry, this is Nakia. Where I remember we did a listing back and it was a voluntary membership. It was the house that was on the hill. The 2 ladies owned it.
Yes.
It didn't hold it up. But have you seen whether if they didn't want to pay this voluntary thing, because they couldn't find the person, the neighbor who was over the voluntary HOA thing. Would this voluntary thing, you think, hold up something, or is it just what it is, voluntary?
It is what it is, voluntary. And usually voluntary, the house that Mark and I are working on right now, they do not have an HOA, but they have a voluntary membership because the community has a pool. And 9 times out of 10, if it's a voluntary, it's usually because of a pool and or tennis.
Okay.
And if you want a key to get in to use the pool, you voluntarily join the membership for it.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks.
But this form also tells you things about the association, if there's assessments due, are they currently looking at an assessment, is there age restriction, and what does your assessments or your monthly fee pay for? What does it cover? Is there current litigation? Page 25, seller lease of buyer's property contingency. This is if the buyer has to sell a property in order to purchase the property they're interested in. And this outlines the terms of what's going on. It will identify the property they need to sell. It will identify the actions that they are or have taken to get the property sold or leased based on number B. The buyer either has to close on their sale or they have to enter into a lease of at least so many terms. I've never seen number 2 used. D, the kick-out clause. This can be confusing to a lot of people. The kick-out clause does not mean that the seller, who, if they get a better offer, can automatically terminate the contract. What it means is the seller has the right, if this is selected, to go to the buyer and say, I have a better offer. They have to show that they have a better offer. And the buyer has the option to release all of his contingency, including this contingency, and proceed with the purchase. So many people explain this to sellers in a way that they think, okay, well, we got a better offer. Because we can kick it out, we can terminate. They cannot. They have to give the option to the buyer to waive the rest of their contingencies. Earnest money goes hard, and they're going to proceed with the purchase. Page 27, seller's property disclosure. Again, another form that you do not touch ever. You do not make corrections to it. You don't fill it in for them. Nothing. They fill this out 100%. There are liability issues involved with this, and I think if the seller has found to have lied on this form, I believe it's 3.5 times damages that the buyer can sue for. And I think they have like 2 or 3 years to do it as well. So don't touch the form. But I will say everything should have an answer. There should not be a blank or a question unanswered. Blanks, yes, because explanation. If there's no explanation, there's no explanation. But if there is a yes answer, there should be an explanation as to why it was yes. And if not, it should be no. Scrolling all the way down through, let's go to page 35, the counter offer. The counter offer is used when you are making, one of the parties is making a counter to the original offer or to a following up counter. In Georgia, you can only have a purchase and sale and one counter. Other states, you may have a purchase and sale and you can have up to 4, 5, 6 counters. They run in order. Georgia does not. You can only have one. So that means you have to be very, very careful in your counter offers, because if someone asks for the refrigerator to remain and a home warranty in the original offer, and in the counter offer you put seller will not provide home warranty, it's removing it. If you have another counter and that same verbiage, seller will not provide home warranty, is not copied over, guess what? Your seller is now on the hook for a home warranty. So things that you modify in multiple counter offers need to be carefully looked at and made sure that you're copying the right things over multiple times.
So the latest is the binding.
Huh?
The latest version would be the binding version.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you forgot to again insert in counter 3 that they're not going to pay for a home warranty, they're going to pay for it because you left, because it's in the original offer saying that they will. Counter offer is made at. The reason they put the time stamp on here relates back to the, if you have filled in the time limit of the original purchase and sale. Because if you put today at 5 as your time limit and this counter comes at 7, there has to be a special step saying this counter is made outside of original offer time limits. Because when the time limit runs out, the offer is no longer valid. And that's another reason I sometimes don't put stuff in there, because I don't know how, once again, you don't know how long this will take somebody to respond. Address. Down here in the purchase, the closing costs, as I told you, now that there is a $sign there, the system only allows you to put in numbers. You only put in things that are changing. If the purchase price is not changing, leave it blank. Do not put in 0. If you put in 0, somebody's buying a property for no money. So if it's not going to change, leave it alone. Some agents, as a safety, they just copy it over. So if you're offering 500,000 and you're not countering it, they're just going to type in 500,000 so it remains the same. So there's no confusion. But this form is mainly for things that you are changing only. Everything else of the offer, original offer, remains the same. If you change the closing possession date, let's say you wanted it on the 13th and possessions at closing. Let's say the seller's going to leave it on the 13th, but they want to hold for 2 days after. Once you change that, again, you have to include Form F219. If you change the earnest money holder from a brokerage to an attorney, it kicks in. Now you have to go back and add 510 and 511. So whatever you want to change goes on this form. And if there's multiple counters, make sure you're copying over what you want to remain there. Page 38, amendment to agreement. This is the 701. This is the standard form that changes things about the contract. A lot of people use this to change due diligence and closing dates. You really shouldn't. There are special forms for changing due diligence and closing dates. Now, if you're changing multiple things, like if you're changing how much in closing costs, etc., and you're changing the closing date at the same time, go ahead and add it. But there is a reason that the closing date form and the due diligence have their own form, and we'll get to them here in a second. But everything goes on here. Please make sure whatever you're putting on here is in clear, understandable layman language, what you want to have happen. Page 39, the amendment to address concerns with property. This form is for correcting things on the inspection report. Make sure it's clear, and make sure you're clear how you want it to happen. Seller shall have qualified contractor repair, replace electrical outlet not grounded in where. It has to be clear who's going to do it, who's responsible for doing it, how they're going to do it. Do they want it? Does it have to be done with a qualified contractor? You have to be precise. You cannot just say, or you can say, seller to fix everything in an inspection report. That's fine and dandy. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out there with a caulk gun and I'm going to put a bunch of caulk up. I'm going to go to Home Depot and I'm going to install it myself. Because guess what? You told me I could. You just said I had to fix it. You didn't tell me how I had to fix it. You didn't have to tell me I had to make sure it was done right. You didn't tell me I had to make sure it was safe. You didn't tell me that it had to be up to code. It has to be clear. If you get something like this and you're representing the seller, I would immediately send it back and ask them to be very, very clear of who and how they want the work done. Because work done can be subjective. That's when they say, buyer wants house professionally cleaned. Professionally cleaned, that's subjective. You can get Mary Maids out there and they still may not like it. So if they want a cleaner, you better tell them, ask them who they want to clean. What company do you want? And we'll get them. This is also where you state how you want, if you want receipts, within how many days, when do the repairs need to be made by, and what every single agent leaves out is what is the repercussion if these things are not done by the date we're saying they need to be done. So if you say something has to be happened on closing, 2 days before closing, and you do your walkthrough the day before closing, and it's not done, what happens? Does closing automatically get extended? Does an X amount of money be held by the closing attorney until these things are done? You have to explain what happens if things are not done.
David,
yes.
Do you have a sample of that verbiage, like just something quick and clear, like?
I can find it and send it
Is
out.
anybody doing it? Is any of your agents, that any of us that you're supporting doing it?
Most people right now, they're giving such the due date for repairs to be done and receipts to be given has moved up to about an average of 5 days prior to closing. So they sort of get in there and start negotiating if it's not. I don't see my thing is, I don't see the reason to have to get in there and start negotiating. If you make it clear what's going to happen in the contract in the first place, it's already clear to the seller. Hey, if you don't do this, this, and this is what's going to happen.
Okay, that's what I would like to see. So it won't be
Yes.
so drawn out. Like, I would like to see if somebody has done it. Like, what did it say?
Yeah.
A
Now, I will
sample.
say this. It is not uncommon for an agent to receive this form and have verbiage that says, if this is not agreed to by 11:59 p.m., et cetera, on the end date of due diligence, the contract automatically terminates and sends a termination along with it. Do not do that. When you send a termination, that's it, period, end of story. You've sent the termination.
Okay.
So if you put verbiage in there that if these things cannot be, come to an agreement with the next, it terminates, leave it at that. Don't send the actual termination form.
Okay.
But this is, yeah. And this form, I will tell you this is, what I'm seeing more is, with multiple offer situations, agents are leaving out a lot of stuff that they're wanting in the main contract. And what they're doing is, especially if they wanted a home warranty, they're coming back and asking for the home warranty in the amendment to address concerns. It's just a ploy tactic. So,
Okay.
page 41, the amendment to due diligence period. This is where you can extend the due diligence period. It's on its own form. You don't have to use the Form 701. And I will tell you, here's something else you need to catch. If you're on the buyer side and you sent the amendment to address concerns and it's amendment number 1 and you haven't got it back yet signed, and you go do, and they need more time, please remember what amendment you have out there, because this amendment would be number 2. And basically just, when are you going to expire to? And this form is one of the forms that lets you change the time. Most things end at 11:59 p.m. This you can set to expire at any time. So if you don't want to be negotiating at 10 o'clock at night, you can say this will expire at 5 p.m. on the 13th. So I need to get something done by 5 p.m. today. Otherwise, it's over with. Page 42. This is where you change the closing possession date. And there is something very special when you use this form, and that's the extension. You can terminate or allow the 8-day to stay in force. There are many agents I've seen on the selling side who will grant a additional week and a half extension, but they take away the right for them to get another 8 days and get another week off market. So on the buyer side, they always send it over with shall remain in full force. On the seller side, I always try to kick it back and say, no, we're going to give you an extension, but you're going to terminate. You're going to terminate your right. If you need an additional extension, guess what? We'll negotiate that, and you may have to owe us some more earnest money, something. But this is the easiest way to do it, and the easiest way if you're having to change possession. And we'll get to that form in a minute. Instructions to closing attorney. You really need, oh, by the way, let me back up because this form just reminded me. GAR just changed the lead-based paint form for one important thing, and that is when you get it signed. They now state in their auditing, and some people have been caught, the lead-based paint has to be executed prior to any contract signing. You can sign it with the contract, but you can't sign it after the contract. That also goes for rentals. So if your rental requires a lead-based paint based upon when it's built, that has to be signed before you execute the lease. Just FYI. Instructions to closing attorney. This really needs to be signed as well, and it needs to be sent. So if you're the buyer's agent, you need to include this in your package, and you need to write down the amount of commission that is shown in FMLS. And you need to print out the FMLS to make sure. There are some agents, when negotiations get heavy and tight, have been known to change the commission in the system and try to get away with that. So always print your FMLS sheet out, send your instructions with your offer. Page 2 of that form, that is where you're going to list if the listing broker or the selling broker is going to give a concession, if you're going to pay for a home warranty, or if you're going to chip into closing costs or something. That's where it needs to go on this form. And that will tell the attorney what to do, how much to do it, and who to take it from. Page 45, notice to unilaterally extend closing date for 8 days. Some people think this is available for use no matter what. It is not. You have to match A, B, or C. So seller cannot satisfy valid title objections. That one's an easy one. That's the only one that the seller can use. Seller can only extend for that reason, and it has to do with him being able to provide marketable title. And that usually comes back when the title comes back and they find a lien or an old lien or an old judgment that needs to be cleared. The buyer can use it if their lender, including all cash, and that's only if you allow them to select A, boxes 1 or 2. If they selected that bottom box, they don't get to use this. Because they cannot, the closing attorney or the lender cannot fill their obligations due to no fault of the buyer. So if the lender can't do something and it's because the buyer failed to deliver taxes or failed to deliver, they can't use that because it was the buyer's fault. Or the buyer has not received their estimates or disclosures under federal federal law. However, this is the one thing I want you to be very, very careful about. A buyer who you allow to select has the right to get a hard money lender. They're not required. Hard money lenders, based upon volume, don't have to send out that CD 3 days in advance and get signatures on it. So you have to be very careful when you get this, that you're getting it the right way. And the method of delivery has to be selected. And remember, email has been determined by GAR as a form of delivery, as long as you can go into your main system and pull up the original email and show the time, date, and stamp that you sent it. Page 46. Oh, God, we got to the bottom. Thank goodness. Unilateral notice to terminate purchase and sale agreement. So the top box is the unilateral. Unilateral is one. It only requires one signature of the parties. I get this back all the time, and both parties have signed it. I just don't understand. But the buyer or seller can use the top box. Basically, the seller's only thing is if they have if the buyer has defaulted somehow, okay, or other lawful reasons, seller can't provide clear title. Buyer right to terminate due diligence periods is set forth. They can terminate for any reason they want unless they're using the right to inspect where there is no due diligence period. The bottom part says where earnest money goes and who it's being released to, and both parties have to sign that section for the release. If it's within due diligence, it's going to go to the buyer. Any other thing, it can be questionable and it can be fault. Depending upon who holds the earnest money, if the broker's holding the earnest money, the broker has to read the contract, and they have the ability to make a reasonable decision and give notice of how it's going to be dispersed, or they can send it to arbitration. So that gets you through the forms and what they're about. The main thing is, remember, fill them in and you won't have a compliance issue. On some of the amendments, you'll notice, especially like Amendment 701, which is the general amendment. Which page is that? Page 38 of the big package. There is an acceptance date box at the bottom. A lot of people try to get away with just filling in the date. You will get flagged by me if you do not have the time, because some of these amendments may go back to certain time limits that have an expiration. So you always have to put in the time and the date. And that's the case with most everything of the amendments. So there you go. If you have questions, you can always call me on it. But that's the basics of the GAR contract, what goes with them, and the related forms, and everything that will get you flagged for a compliance issue.
Awesome.
So just make sure that you have got it all together. But let me go back to one last thing, because I switched over. On the page 7 of the purchase and sale, there's also a room for your special steps there. If you're using any of those things under number 8, you need to select them, and you need to write the corresponding exhibit letter number in the box. On page 8 of the agreement, the buyer, under buyer and seller, once again, this goes right back to the contact information and the parties to the contract. You have to have one of those 3 sources there. You either need to have their address, you need to have their phone number, or you need to have their email address for just to satisfy the purpose of notice being able to be served. Under the selling and the listing broker, those lines need to be filled in. The only line that may not have an answer, and if it doesn't, it needs to be NA, is a realtor membership. Not everybody is a realtor. Question is how they get the form. They usually borrow it from somebody. But I will tell you, on my side, regardless of which one, under GGR, everything needs to be filled in. The firm name, your license number, your phone number, your email, your membership, our address, our MLS code, and our license number has to be filled in. And I will tell you, there is a reason for it. And that reason is, if someone wants to file a complaint against you, and they want your board of realtors, they have a right to know that. That's why it's disclosed there. If they go to the commission's going to ask for for the company's brokerage number. It is there. That's why it's there, and that's why you provide it. It is not let's make it look pretty. It is, you need to give your clients the information necessary to sue you later or file a complaint. And the binding agreement date, this form was changed, GAR formed it, so anybody can now bind. It used to be that the offerer was the only one that could bind it. No, I'm sorry, the offeree. So you get it, if you accept it, if your seller accepts it, you all sign it, then you send it back to the buyer's agent, they bind it. Now, either agent can bind. But if you change anything, so let's say, for example, that material relationship, you had to write in GGR equals none. That means your seller has to sign it, and then you has to initial it, sign everything else. Then you send it back. The buyer's agent has to get the buyer to initial that addition change to the contract. Then they can bind it. So you can't bind anything if there are initials that are missing. And more importantly, once a contract is bound, you can't go back into the contract and change it. So if there's information missing and you're tagged in the compliance, it can only be added by addendum to the contract. You can't go back in and add it. And one of the reasons is if a file gets in trouble and if a file gets audited, the commission pulls both files. So if they were to audit 123 Main Street on our end, they're going to go over to the other brokerage and they're going to ask for 123 Main Street, and they're going to look and they're going to make sure everything is exactly the same. And if one company has a copy of a contract that has something added and the other party doesn't have it, there's going to be bigger problems. So that's why once it's bound, changes can't be made. Everything has to be made by addendum. So, any questions? Since I went over time.
No, that was good.
Mhm.
We still on for Thursday?
Yes, we are still on for Thursday, and Thursday will be the Thursday's the new. Oh no! Oh, I'm getting old. I'm getting so old. It is how to set your goals without doing it based upon gross commission income.
Cool.
So that's Thursday at 10.
All righty. I will see
That was
you.
great. Thank you.
Have a
And
good day, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you going to have the recordings? Because I missed like the first 15 minutes.
Yes, I'm recording it, and it is on my list to set up the Google Drive thing today.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Barbara, I still got to call you. I know it's a week later.
It's okay. No worries.
All right.
It's fine. Thank
Bye.
you.
Hi, Ryan. See ya.
Bye.